chapter 8 tonight. Chapter 8 and chapter 9, as I said before, are two of my favorite chapters in the book of Proverbs. I don't know, it just is very interesting to me. And one reason why I feel like it's interesting is just the personification of it. Now, we had a little bit of personification of wisdom back in chapter 1, if you recall, when wisdom was calling out and asking young men to come to see her. Now that we're kind of getting to the end of that section where it's not individual proverbs, it's more of a poetical prose statement, I guess you could say. Not the right word, but anyway, it's an extended section. And so we're kind of getting down to the end of it. And so we come back into this idea about this personification. And I think that one reason why I like it with the personification, and one thing that the personification does, is it really makes this appeal to attain to wisdom all that more real and all that more personal, right? I mean, if, I could say something like, hey, let's go do this, or, this is a good thing to do, you might chalk it up as, yeah, this is a good thing to do. But if, I put some sort of emotional appeal to it, then it's a little bit different. And so this is what this personification of wisdom and a personification of folly, too, is all about. Okay? All right, so getting into it in chapter 8 and in the first 3 verses here, we see a little bit about what this wisdom's call. And so verses 1 through 3 says, "Does not wisdom call out? Does not understanding raise her voice? At the highest point along the way, where the paths meet, she takes her stand. Beside the gate leading into the city, at the entrance she cries aloud." And so here we've got the setting that's right there. By the way, can certain people in the back row see this?
Yes.
You want just a little bigger?
Yeah, that's good.
Is that better? Okay. All right. And so when we look at this, doesn't that kind of remind you back to what the personification of wisdom was in chapter 1? Personification of wisdom in chapter 1. The wisdom is there and she's in a very public place trying to call out to people. And what we see is right here at the highest point along the way where paths meet, beside the gate leading into the city, at the entrance. And so you can see that this is where people are coming together. This is where you're going to have the largest concentration of people right here. And so again, this is showing us that wisdom is for everybody. There may be some people say, oh, wisdom's not for me. Yeah, it is. It's just that you don't want to accept it. That's pretty much the thing about it is. Okay? So what we see starting out in verse number 4 is a little bit about what wisdom is going to say. As a matter of fact, the rest of chapter 8 is what wisdom is saying. And so as we get into chapter 8, I think that sometimes it's a little bit confusing and we say, well, wait a minute. When we talk about how wisdom was there in the creation and we think about God in the creation, sometimes it's easy for our minds to slip and say, well, wait a minute, and try to attribute wisdom to God. But let's understand what this is really talking about here, is that this is a personification of an intangible thing, wisdom. Okay? All right. So what wisdom says is this. To you, O people, I call out, I raise my voice to all mankind. You who are simple, gain prudence. You who are foolish, set your hearts on it. Listen, for I have trustworthy things to say. I open my lips to speak what is right. So again, just like what we're looking at in chapter 1 with that personification, who is wisdom for?
Everybody.
Well, everybody, but more to the point,
The simple, foolish.
right here, you who are simple, you who are foolish, okay? And so, and yeah, you could say everybody, because it's saying to you, O people, I call out to all mankind. So that is everybody. But more specifically, to the point, is to the people who are simple, to the people who are foolish. You know, there's one thing that we need to understand is that all of us need wisdom, but in order to have wisdom, what do we have to be able to take? It's something that's not pleasant. It's not something that people don't really want. It goes against our human nature.
Criticism, correction.
Criticism, correction. Right. You know, because in order to have wisdom, we've got to change our ways. In order to change our ways, we've got to come to an understanding of, hey, wait a minute, this is wrong. And I can do it better. Right? You know, that really is kind of a hard thing to do. To be able to say, yeah, I want to go on and make a change, and I need to make a change. But when we take a look at verses 7 through 10, this is what we see. What we see in verses 7 through 10 is, my mouth speaks what is true, for my lips detest wickedness. By the way, that's an interesting juxtaposition right there, isn't it? And that is wisdom is saying, my mouth speaks truth because my lips detest things that are wicked. And so because wisdom is just totally repulsed, wisdom is totally repulsed by wickedness, then therefore the only thing that's left for her to say is what? Is truth. Okay? So it says, all my words of my mouth are just, none of them is crooked or perverse. To the discerning, all of them are right. They who are upright to choose, who have knowledge. Choose my instruction instead of silver, knowledge rather than choice gold. And so there's got to be that element of people saying, wait a minute, you know, I need this, I want this. This is something that's very valuable in my life. And so, you know, there's the idea of I need to do this. And to do that, we've got to understand that there's some correction that's involved in it. Okay? Questions and comments on that before we start to see how wisdom is used? Okay. Well, we see a little bit about how wisdom is used in verses 14, 15, and 16. We see that she says, counsel and judgment are mine. I have insight, I have power. By me kings rule, and rulers issue decrees that are just. By me princes govern, and nobles, all who rule on the earth. Now, let me ask you a question. Does this mean that all rulers are wise? No. But what it does mean is this. Rulers who are doing a good job. Rulers who are, what it says here, issuing decrees that are just. How are they going to be issuing those decrees that are just? By wisdom. Okay? And so here kings reign, princes, nobles, all the rules on the earth, you know, all those people, when they rule justly, they're going to be using wisdom in their politics. Okay? Did somebody have a question or a comment? No.
Instead of reading it as like, by me kings reign and rulers decree, but you could say, with wisdom kings reign and rulers decree. With wisdom princes govern and nobles rule over the earth.
Right. Okay. And so you can see, this doesn't make princes and nobles and rulers automatically wise, right? And so we can't really just say, oh, well, because of this, every single ruler that we have, every single politician that we have is going to be wise because, you know, practicality tells us that that's not the case. But practicality also tells us that the people that are in power oftentimes are, corrupt and foolish and wicked and sinful and watching out for themselves and everything like that. And so in that category, they're not using wisdom. But if they are going to be using wisdom, especially if they're going to be using godly wisdom, then the things that they're going to be coming up with are going to be things that are just. Okay? So when we think about wisdom, we think, okay, this is something that is a really powerful thing, isn't it? And this is why he said, or she says, and back in verse number 14, of I have insight, I have power. And it really is a powerful thing to have wisdom. Wisdom can do something that powerful armies and money can't do. And that is, wisdom can come up with solutions to problems and come up with different things that really work out all kinds of situations, right? Okay? So now we may be looking at that. We may say, okay, well, here's, kings and rulers and princes and nobles. I ain't any of them. So that means that it ain't for me, right? Well, wrong, because you notice in verse 17, I love those who love me, and those who seek me find me. It's not about your position that wisdom will gravitate to. It is about your heart that wisdom will gravitate to. People may be looking and saying, I guess I really don't need wisdom because I'm not put in a position of authority. Well, no, you still need wisdom, and wisdom is still attainable because she's calling out for everybody. And it's not just simply a person's position. It is the condition of their heart that's going to make the case. Okay? All right. More comments or questions about that?
Well,
Oh, Carol first.
I just wondered, I noticed that it's always she.
Yes.
Anything, or is it just,
What's that?
does that mean anything?
Yeah, actually it does. It does, especially when you kind of put things into the picture, okay? Because you remember I talked about how it's laid out where we've got the first 9 chapters, and then we've got all these proverbs, and then the end of chapter 31 is that wife of noble character, right? And so if you want to put everything in that, you can kind of see that it's almost like, the case is being made of here are the benefits of wisdom, the warnings of folly, and an appeal to adhere to wisdom. And then all of a sudden, kind of like at the end of the book, it's like, hey, if you really want a woman of noble character, which is hard to find, then here's wisdom, and you might as well just marry wisdom, okay? And at the same time, you asked a question a couple weeks ago talking about adultery, and you said, is this, literal adultery? And at the time, it was. But when you go back into chapter 7, and you see how it's talking about, see, there's that one right there. That one right there. Okay? All right. Back in chapter 7, where he was talking about, let's see. In verse number, all in chapter 7, he's sitting there, and this, he's watching out the window, and the young man is there, and then here comes a woman to meet him, and she's loud and defiant, verse number 11. And then in verse number 14, she says, I have fellowship offerings at home. Today I fulfilled my vows. And then go on down to the last little verse of her house is a highway to the grave leading down to the chambers of death. What we're going to see is later on, and I know I'm jumping ahead of myself, but later on when we get to this invitations of folly and wisdom, the invitation of folly, the last of it is the same as that right there, or similar to that right there. And so you could almost say that this is kind of leading up to this personification of folly. And that being the case, then we're really not just talking about physical adultery. We're also talking about spiritual adultery too, which is equally as damaging, equally as bad, and even more damaging and bad than the other. Okay, and so coming back around to your question, that's why it's portrayed as feminine. That, and I think the Hebrew word is feminine in its gender too. But, Kinsey, did you have something?
I was just going to say, thinking about who this was written by, Solomon, just kind of like putting this out in like a actual example. Just seeing how he started off his reign, how his dad, David, tells him in 1 Kings chapter 1 to follow God's commands and you're going to prosper. His reign will prosper, which it did. You see that. And also, going into chapter 3 of 1 Kings, it just shows Solomon asking. So it's like you've got these two things here, like, by me kings reign and rulers issues decrees that are just. We see Solomon had just decrees, just judgments in wisdom, and those who I love those who love me and those who seek me find me. Solomon was seeking that in his early days, like right when he was established on the throne. And you just saw, like, it's just like, it's cool how that's like an example painted out for us, and this is written by the one who experienced that.
Right. Now, of course, God inspired him to write it, but when God inspires people to write, He inspires them with their own background, personalities, things like that. And so, well, more to the point, its inspiration was a little bit more than that. But you can see that as Solomon and as God inspired, Solomon to include who he was and how he's writing to his sons, that here is his. He had the goods to back it up. Is what I'm saying. Okay. All right. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, let's move on down to see a little bit more about what appeal wisdom has, strength wisdom has. We see starting in verse number 22 is how wisdom was used in the creative process. Okay, and so reading a long passage of scripture here, starting in verse number 22. It says, "The Lord brought me forth as the first of His works before His deeds of old. I was formed long ages ago, at the very beginning when the world came to be. When there were no watery depths, I was given birth. When there were no springs overflowing with water, before the mountains were settled in place, before the hills I was given birth. Before He made the world or its fields, or any of the dust of the earth, I was there when He set the heavens in place, when He marked out the horizon on the face of the deep, when He established the clouds above and fixed securely the fountains of the deep, when He gave the sea its boundary so the waters would not overstep His command, and when He marked out the foundations of the earth." And so we can see that wisdom was present when God created all that there is. Now, stop and think about this. Have you ever jumped into a project, and after you jumped into the project, then you went and it's like you bought something and you jumped into it and then you grabbed the instructions, right? For those of you who are too prideful to say, I don't need instructions, and maybe you don't, but there's always, you jump into a project, and then after you finish it, and then if you have to repeat it over again, It's like, yeah, I've got lessons learned from it. Okay? And so the point is that before you go and you start to do something, if you can have some forethought and knowledge and wisdom about you, then everything goes much, much smoother to plan. Now, think about the complexities of this creation. I mean, as a matter of fact, physicists talk about how everything has to be very balanced in the universe, and how things, if they're not exactly right, then everything just simply spirals out of control. And let's just assume that there was a Big Bang creative process when God created the earth. They're saying that there's four forces that had to come into being in the correct order at the correct magnitude, and these had to be so minutely fine-tuned that if it wasn't, everything would have disintegrated. And this is talking about in the first split second of things. Okay? And so if you think about God in His creative process, and not just simply with that, with everything, you know, the distance of the earth around the sun, the size of the sun, the size of the earth, the size of the moon, you know, the content of the oceans, the quantity of the oceans. I mean, everything altogether is necessary for just simply supporting life. And, you know, and we're just talking about here, but how about across the entire universe? That's just truly incredible, isn't it? Now, where it says that wisdom was given birth, okay, there's several different times that she says that she was given birth. Remember, wisdom is not a tangible thing, and so wisdom cannot actually be given birth. But this is a personification of it. And so really what it's saying is that before God formed anything, God used wisdom in all that He did. So if it was good enough for God to do what He did in the creation of the heavens and the earth, then don't you think it's good enough for us to use ourselves? Right? And when you stop and think about that, to me that's a pretty powerful thing. Okay? And so, unless somebody has a comment or question. And so, starting in verse number 33, we start to see a little bit of an appeal. And that is, listen to my instruction. Verse number 32, now then, my children, listen to me. Blessed are those who keep my ways. Listen to my instruction and be wise. Do not disregard it. Blessed are those who listen to me, watching daily at my doors, waiting at my doorway. For those who find me find life and receive favor from the Lord. But those who fail to find me harm themselves, and all who hate me love death. Man, I really like that first part of verse 35. Those who fail to find me harm themselves. Now, why is it that people harm themselves if they don't find wisdom?
They're accepting the consequences of folly.
They're accepting the consequences of folly.
Which is only bad always.
Okay. But when I read that, it says, those who fail to find me harm themselves. I mean, this is the consequence. But it's kind of like, hey, you get what you deserve. I mean, is that what it sounds like? So how is it that people get what they deserve?
Every choice is either going to be a blessing or a consequence.
Okay. But looking at it just right there, March, it's kind of like, oh, okay, well, it's a pretty harsh world that we live in then, because, you know, I make the wrong choice, I deal with the consequences, you know. Where do I have help in making the right choice?
And that's where research, finding out what wisdom, get the truth.
That's where He comes in and says, watching daily at my doors and waiting at my doorways, right? Listening to me. If wisdom was tucked away in a corner, all quiet and demure, then that would be a very cold, harsh world, wouldn't it? Because we're going through it and we're just simply making choices, and it's, oh, finally I found something to help me with a choice. But instead, wisdom is right there. And so if you don't listen to wisdom, then you harm yourself, right? And
I think that line there, to fail to find me. All you have to do, it says earlier, is just look for me.
right,
So it's not like you said, they didn't fail because they looked hard and couldn't find it. They just
Right.
didn't look.
yeah, they failed to find. They failed to get wisdom. And so, and again, wisdom is there, but what it takes is us being willing to accept that correction. Right? Okay. And to help us to accept that correction, we need to have the humility to say, hey, God's ways are better than our ways. Okay? All right, so moving into chapter 9. So in chapter 9, we have this, is what the subtitle says, the invitation of wisdom and folly. And so here we've got both wisdom and folly contrasted and compared, but wisdom and folly both personified as well. Okay? And so in the first 12 verses, we have this personification of wisdom. And it says, wisdom has built her house. She set up its 7 pillars. She has prepared her meat and mixed her wine. She has also set her table. She has sent out her servants, and she calls from the highest point of the city. Let all who are simple come to my house. To those who have no sense, she says, come eat my food and drink the wine I have mixed. Leave your simple ways and you will live. Walk in the way of insight. Whoever corrects a mocker invites insult. Whoever rebukes the wicked incurs abuse. Do not rebuke mockers or they will hate you. Rebuke the wise and they will love you. Instruct the wise and they will be wiser still. Teach the righteous and they will add to their learning. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. For through wisdom your days will be many, and your years will be added to your life. If you are wise, your wisdom will reward you. If you are a mocker, you alone will suffer. And so here's this personification of wisdom, right? Now, with that, we've got this personification of folly in verse number 13. Quite a bit shorter passage. But it says, verse 13, folly is an unruly woman. She is simple and knows nothing. She sits at the door of her house on a seat at the highest point of the city, calling out to those who pass by, who go straight on their ways. Let all who are simple come to my house. To those who have no sense, she says, stolen water is sweet. Food eaten in secret is delicious. But little do they know that the dead are there and that her guests are deep in the realm of the dead. Okay? So, personification of each. Now, when we look at this personification, we see we see some similarities and we see some contrasts. Okay? So, first of all, similarities. What do we see that's similar between Lady Wisdom and Woman Folly?
Both women. Both women. True.
They both call out.
Okay, both of them are calling out. Okay? Question is, where are they calling out?
The highest part of the city.
Okay, so what we have here is she is calling out from the highest point of the city, right? Okay, and so when we look at folly, she too is calling out, but she is at a seat at the highest point of the city calling out. Okay, and so when you look at wisdom and you see that wisdom is calling out in a very public, very acknowledgeable place, then you need to understand that folly is also right there calling out in a very similar place, right? As accessible as wisdom is, folly is equally accessible.
Do they both say, let all who are simple? Are they both calling to the simple?
Yep, they sure do. That's another one. In verse number 16, let all who are simple come to my house. And then we go up here into verse number 4, let all who are simple come to my house.
So it's like wisdom saying, this is not too out of reach for the simple, but then the, however you say, the foolish woman, the woman of folly, knows that the simple are easily ensnared by the foolishness.
Let me ask you this. Who walking on the face of this earth is not simple, morally? It's only Jesus, right? All the rest of us are because we are sinners. Now, yeah, there's going to be some people that have more of it than others, but largely that's because there are more people that are listening to folly than wisdom, right? Okay? We've got that nature, and so it's right there. It's very apparent. It's calling out to the simple. So, if the simple choose not to listen to wisdom, then they are going to be listening to folly. It's not I can be in the middle ground type thing. I can stay on my own lane. I don't have to go this way or the other way. I can carve my own path ahead. No, it isn't like that. You're going to be going one way or the other. And if you don't choose to go wisdom's way, then you will be going folly's way. Okay? All right. So understanding the similarities there, what about contrasts? Okay, we've got a contrast of a place. We've got a contrast of what to do that's there, and we've got a contrast of results as well. Okay, let's look at these. In verse number 1, you note it says, "Wisdom has built her house." Okay, and we also, read about folly in her house too. But notice how wisdom's house is described. She has set up its 7 pillars, right? And so when you think about, when you get a mental image of wisdom's house, what are you thinking of? Are you thinking of some kind of ramshackle shack? Are you thinking of some grand palace? Grand palace, because if you're going to be setting up pillars, in order to set up pillars, that's a sign of prestige. That's a sign of wealth. That's a sign of power that's there. Now, notice that the number of pillars is what? 7. What? If you're going to say 7 represents something in the Bible, what does 7 represent? Completeness. As a matter of fact, it's more of a godly perfection, godly completeness too. God finished and rested on the 7th day, right? And so if we're going to say wisdom's house has 7 pillars, then not only is this a grand, glorious place, but it is complete as well. Right? Okay. Now, let's contrast that with Loud Lady Folly's house. And so, Loud Lady Folly's house, it says right here, she sits at the door of her house. Okay? In verse number 16, it says, "Come to my house." Can you get any plainer than that? You can't, can you? What kind of house is it? Oh, it's just so plain. It's just a house. That's it. It is It is a house like any other house. There's nothing special about it. There's nothing characteristic about it. It's just there, isn't it? Now, when you think about wisdom and the greatness and everything of wisdom, you can kind of see how it is contrasted with folly. You know, when somebody's being wise, do they stand out? And is that standing out something of nobility? Yeah. But when somebody's being foolish, does it really stand out other than standing out as something that's foolish? You know? It's just, well, that's just the way that the world is, isn't it? And it really is. You know? Now, some people may stand out in that way of the world, but it's just simply more of the same of the way of the world. Okay? All right. So here's a contrast of place, but there's a contrast of what is going on. So in both of these invitations of wisdom and folly, we've got calling out to the masses to come in and really calling out of coming into the house in order to have a meal. Okay? And so what we see is that in verse number 2, it's that she has prepared her meat, mixed her wine, she has set her table, and not only that, but she has sent out her servants. And so when you think about wisdom's meal, what do you think of when you think of this?
Classy.
What?
I said classy.
Classy.
A banquet.
A banquet. It's a spread, isn't it? You know, it's not, hey, we got a frozen pizza, let's throw it in the oven because company's coming over real soon type thing. It is, you know, she is preparing her meat. She is mixing her wine. She is setting her table. She is sending out servants. You know, all of this is on the up and up. All of this is classy. All of this is noble, regal, right? Okay, now contrast that with Lady Folly, okay? What does she has?
Stolen water.
Stolen water is sweet. Food eaten in secret is delicious, okay? Stolen water, it's going to be sweet. Food eaten in secret is delicious. How many of you ever eaten food in secret? Yeah, I'm looking at Kinsey because of a story of when she was a little girl going and stealing a bunch of chocolates and running into the laundry room to quickly devour the chocolates that we told her that she couldn't have, okay?
It was sweet and it was delicious.
At the time. You know, when you think about it, if you are eating something that you know you're not supposed to have, and that's why you're doing it in secret, right? You know, you can't have it. At the time, yeah, it's going to be really delicious because you are fulfilling not just simply a physical craving, but you're also fulfilling a sinful craving as well. Okay, so yeah, there's going to be that rush from it, but at the same time, afterwards, what's the effects? It's guilt or punishment if you get caught. You know, so if you get caught, but if you don't get caught, then you got guilt, right? Okay. So here's the thing, you know, here's Folly, and she's not really preparing anything, is she? Because she doesn't have to. It's not even hers. It's just, you know, let's just take a bunch of other stuff and then serve it to our guests here and let them eat it and consume it and deal with the consequences of it. And so you can see the contrast here between what wisdom is offering us versus what folly is offering us. And it's just two starkly, totally different things, isn't it? And the other contrast is this contrast of consequence. Since we're down here in verse number 18, you notice what verse number 18 says, and that is the consequence of listening and following folly is what? Dead. Death. Right? Now, we contrast that with what we've got with wisdom. And what we see is that in verse number 11, we've got what? Life. Okay? So what does wisdom do for us? Well, wisdom gives us life. What does folly do for us? Folly gives us death. Now, again, what we need to do is we need to understand that this can be taken in a figurative sense. We're not just simply talking about physical death, period. You know, you do something foolish, you know, that's it. Even though that can be the case, right? Some people who go and do something foolish, that may be the very last act that they do on this face of this earth. Because they did something stupid, right? Okay? At the same time, if you expand that thought of death into thinking of just simply all kinds of really bad stuff, then we get a better picture of it, right? And that is that by listening to folly, we have all kinds of different problems, whether there be emotional problems, relationship problems, financial problems, the list can go on and on and on and on. And when we are met with those problems, and sometimes these are very big problems, it really does feel like death. And you know, there's sometimes that it's kind of like, it's such a bad problem, we wish we would die instead of having to deal with these things, okay? All right. And then if we want to take it even a step further than that, we've got a spiritual application as well. And that is the furthest extent from that is a spiritual application that if people listen to folly, ignore God, ignore the teachings of God, then all of a sudden you could very well talk about death, hell, and the grave type death, right? And so, you know, when we talk about this listening into folly and going into, her house, the dead in there, her guests are in the deep realm. We go back to chapter 7 in verse number 27. It says, her house is a highway to the grave, leading down to the chambers of death. And so you can see it's the same type of illustration there, right? Okay. So here we've got all these different contrasts and comparisons there between the two. And so, you know, when you put it all together, it really kind of stands out of, wow, what the smart choice is wisdom. The dumb choice is folly. The easy choice is folly. The hard but good choice is wisdom. And so now it's up to us. Okay, you got any questions or comments on the rest of any of that? I think Naomi was the one that had the most to say tonight.
I don't think any of it was productive. I think most of it was, I'm not happy.
Well, I hate to say it, you know, but it says here folly is an unruly woman, you know.
She's calling out.
She's calling out. She's calling out. It's up to her parents.
Are you unruly?
It's up to her parents to affect and change her behavior.
I don't know. I just flipped to my page and the thing that popped up was Proverbs 13:24. Whoever spares the rod hates their children, but the one who loves their child is careful to discipline them.
I think they want me to spank you, Naomi.
No,
For a while.
We'll wait. Oh, you just made her cry.
I was telling you a good thing.
She said, I just want a nap.
All right, we'll leave it right there. Okay. All right. Well, let's bow our heads. Dear Lord in heaven, we thank you for your blessings. We thank you for tonight. We thank you for the word that you've given to us. We ask you that you would please help us to accept wisdom. Help us to always search out for the good things that she's giving to us, and help us to reject folly's call out in our lives. Lord, we ask that you please help us to have the grace and wisdom to understand and do what we need to in our lives. Lord, we ask all of this in Jesus' name. Amen.